30 feet beneath a burning city, surrounded by concrete walls that shook with every Soviet shell, a tyrant prepared to die. The empire he built on hatred and violence was collapsing above him. Yet in his final hours, he clung to delusion, believing history would vindicate him. This is the true story of Adolf Hitler's last days, reconstructed from eyewitness accounts, military records, and documents recovered from the ruins. What happened in that underground tomb reveals not just how evil ends, but how it justifies itself even in defeat. Welcome to the bunker. Berlin, April 29, 1945. Adolf Hitler had roughly 27 hours left to live. The Third Reich, which he had promised would last 1,000 years, was disintegrating after only 12. Soviet artillery pounded the city relentlessly as Red Army soldiers fought their way through burning streets, block by devastated block. 30 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, in a claustrophobic maze of concrete chambers, Hitler waited for the end. The bunker complex consisted of 2 levels connected by narrow staircases. The upper level housed staff quarters, kitchens, and briefing rooms. The lower level contained Hitler's private rooms, a small conference area, and cramped corridors where his final loyalists moved like ghosts. The ventilation system struggled against smoke filtering down from the inferno above. Despite walls designed to withstand heavy bombardment, the constant rumble of Soviet guns penetrated everything. Hitler was 56 years old but looked decades older, gaunt, pale, with a tremor. Witnesses described Hitler's left hand shaking uncontrollably, a tremor many historians attribute to Parkinson's disease, though he was never formally diagnosed. Newsreels from 1944 and 1945 captured his deteriorating condition with stark clarity. The shuffling walk, the stooped posture, the hand clasped behind his back to hide its movement. This physical decline mirrored the collapse of his regime. 12 years earlier, he had stood at absolute power's zenith, commanding armies across Europe, his word determining millions of lives. Now his empire had contracted to these underground chambers, where artificial light burned constantly and time lost all meaning. On this day, April 29th, he would marry his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a brief civil ceremony after midnight. He would dictate his final testament, blaming Jews for the war and naming his successors. Then, on April 30th, he would take his own life. But first came the agonizing wait, hours stretching like days in the bunker's oppressive atmosphere, where every sound. The afternoon military briefing brought devastating news. General Wilhelm Mohnke reported Soviet forces advancing from all directions, encircling central Berlin. German defensive positions collapsed street by street. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and no reinforcements were coming. Hitler listened in silence at the conference table in the bunker's cramped briefing room. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins representing unit positions that no longer existed in reality. Many divisions had been destroyed or simply dissolved, their soldiers fleeing westward or hiding in cellars. Hitler asked few questions, his responses brief and disconnected. Witnesses recalled he seemed physically present, but mentally elsewhere. 8 days earlier, on April 22nd, he had suffered a breakdown during a conference, finally admitting the war's lost. He had raged at his generals, blamed them for defeat, and declared he would stay in Berlin until the end. Some urged him to escape to Bavaria, to the so-called Alpine National Redoubt, but Hitler refused. By April 29th, his decision to die in the bunker was absolute. The question was no longer if, but when. Following the briefing, Hitler retreated to his private quarters and ate little, perhaps some soup and bread, though accounts vary. His diet had been severely restricted for weeks due to stomach problems and stress. Eva Braun joined him for the meal, and according to secretaries, she maintained a remarkably cheerful demeanor, despite the circumstances. The contrast was striking. While Hitler seemed increasingly detached and hollow, Eva projected almost defiant normalcy. She dressed carefully each day, chatted about trivial matters with the staff, and seemed determined to preserve ordinary life semblance, even as the world collapsed around them. Meanwhile, the bunker's routine continued with mechanical precision. Guards changed shifts, secretaries typed reports that would never be filed, and kitchen staff prepared meals from dwindling supplies. Above ground, the city burned. Below, bureaucracy's rituals persisted. Hitler met privately with Joseph Goebbels during the afternoon hours. Behind closed doors, they discussed arrangements for Hitler's death and the regime's future after he was gone. Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda since 1933, had been one of Hitler's earliest followers and most devoted disciples. Unlike others who fled, Goebbels remained at Hitler's side, having already resolved to die alongside his Führer. He had brought his wife Magda and their 6 children into the bunker days earlier, revealing his intentions. He would not survive Hitler, and his family would not survive him. This total commitment, even unto death, characterized Goebbels' fanaticism. During their meeting, Hitler and Goebbels discussed practical matters. Who would witness the marriage ceremony? How the testaments would be recorded and preserved? Who would carry them out of Berlin? Hitler had decided Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz would succeed him as head of state, a decision formalized in his political testament. Shortly after midnight on April 30th, the marriage ceremony began. Walter Wagner, a minor city official authorized to conduct civil marriages, had been summoned to the bunker. He was understandably nervous, brought into this underground complex to marry Adolf Hitler as Soviet forces closed in. The ceremony was brief and mechanical, a bureaucratic procedure rather than a celebration. Wagner read the required legal language and asked the necessary questions. Hitler and Eva responded with prescribed affirmations. When asked to state her full name, Eva began writing Eva Braun on the marriage certificate, then stopped and crossed it out. She wrote Eva Hitler born Braun instead. This small detail later became documented proof the marriage occurred. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann signed as witnesses, validating the document. The marriage was legally complete. Hitler and Eva were husband and wife with perhaps 36 hours of married life remaining. After the ceremony, champagne was served. Toasts were offered in the cramped conference room. The mood was subdued but not entirely grim. For a few minutes, people pretended this was a normal wedding. Hitler and Eva accepted congratulations from those present. Eva smiled. Hitler remained composed but showed little emotion. The ceremony had been important to both of them, but it was a formality rather than a joyful occasion. They were preparing to die, not beginning a life together. The small gathering dispersed after perhaps 30 minutes. Hitler and Eva returned to their private quarters while secretaries went back to their rooms. Wagner was escorted out of the bunker shortly after, his role complete. He had married Adolf Hitler, a bizarre footnote in history's final chapter. Days later, Wagner would die attempting to escape Berlin. By 1 a.m., the bunker had returned to tense quiet. The marriage was complete. The next major event would be Hitler's death, now less than 15 hours away. Dawn crept closer outside. The morning of April 30th brought Hitler's final military briefing. General Muncke delivered devastating news. Soviet forces were converging on the Reich Chancellery from multiple directions. German defensive positions had completely collapsed. Late that morning, General Helmuth Weidling, Berlin's defense commander, would meet with Hitler and deliver the decisive final assessment. Weidling reported the garrison would run out of ammunition by that night. He requested permission for a breakout attempt. Hitler granted it, though by then it was too late for most. Hitler listened impassively, asked no questions, offered no orders. The military situation no longer mattered to him. His focus was entirely on his own death. The war was over, Germany had lost, his empire had fallen. All that remained was his final act. After the briefing concluded, Hitler met privately with Muncke to discuss defense of the immediate area around the bunker entrance. Muncke was brutally honest. Hours, not days, perhaps one day at most before Soviet forces would reach the Chancellery complex. Hitler accepted this information without visible reaction. He thanked Muncke for his service and dismissed him. The final preparations proceeded with grim efficiency. Hitler's valet Heinz Lange and SS adjutant Otto Günsche received detailed instructions about disposing of Hitler's body after his death. Gasoline had been prepared and stored near the bunker exit. The location in the garden had been identified. The procedures were clear. When Hitler died, they would immediately burn his body. This decision was influenced by news of Benito Mussolini's gruesome end. Mussolini and his mistress had been executed by Italian partisans on April 28th, their bodies publicly displayed and hung upside down in Milan on April 29th. Hitler was horrified and determined not to allow his own corpse to be captured and desecrated. The afternoon hours crawled forward with agonizing slowness as Hitler prepared. Around 3:30 p.m. on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to his private study. What happened next was reconstructed from testimony of those waiting outside. A single gunshot was heard. After waiting several minutes, Lang, Gunsch, Goebbels, and Bormann entered the room. They found Hitler dead on the sofa, shot through the right temple with his Walter pistol lying nearby. Eva lay beside him, dead from cyanide poisoning. The bodies were wrapped in blankets and carried up the stairs to the Chancellery Garden, where they were placed in a shallow depression. Gasoline was poured over them and ignited. As Soviet shells continued to fall around them, the small group gave Hitler's body a final Nazi salute while the flames consumed it. The man who had brought unimaginable horror to millions, who had started a war that killed over 60 million people, who had orchestrated the Holocaust's systematic murder of 6 million Jews, died a coward's death. The Third Reich survived its Führer by only 7 days. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The bunker that witnessed Hitler's final hours would be buried, demolished, and paved over, an unmarked grave for history's darkest chapter. But the lessons remain. Evil must be confronted, not appeased.